Thank you for coming tonight. There's a story about the Buddha that I really like. It's very simple. At the time of the Buddha, of course, there weren't so many Buddhists, but there were a lot of spiritual practitioners around, and a wide variety of practices, people doing all sorts of kind of extreme things. And one of the effects of doing this kind of extreme practice, and even today you can see people who, they'll stand on one leg in tree pose for 4 days, or they stop eating for a very long time, kind of testing the boundaries of ordinary life. One of the things that people are said to develop is what we sometimes call siddhis, which are supernatural abilities. And these can be very mundane, like the ability to go without food, or sometimes one that you hear a lot about, though I don't know why, is the ability to kill a bird with a glance. Right? I'm not sure where that's useful. And so one of the ways that you could recognize that someone had some sort of spiritual attainment was to find out what could they do. And the story goes that someone came to the Buddha and asked the Buddha, "What is your supernatural power?" And the Buddha was very kind of standoffish about this. He said, "I don't vision. It's not. And he said, no, I really want to know. I need to know so that I know if I should be your student or not." And the Buddha said, "Really, there's not much to it. I just, I can talk to you about what I'm teaching, but that's about it." And the man was very disappointed and started to walk away. We'll say his name is Jim. And after he started to get some distance, the Buddha says, "Jim!" And he turns around and he says, "What?" And the Buddha says, "That's my supernatural power." There are probably lots of ways you could interpret this story, but a very simple one is that it's very easy for us to steal someone's attention. We make that very available to everyone, and he knew that. Whatever spiritual practice this person was doing, whatever path they were on, if the Buddha just said his name, he'd do whatever he wanted. The people who write spam email, they know this very well. They make a science of trying to find the thing that will get your attention. Whatever that is, whatever it is will make you click on that message. The theme for tonight is awareness. And I want to talk about awareness in a few different ways. First, I want to talk about awareness as something that we can notice. And then I want to talk about awareness as something that we can cultivate. And if we have time, there's a third way. We'll see. In order to talk about this, I want to ask you to indulge me in a little exercise. So, this is very simple. But wherever you are, you can sit up straight. I know these chairs are not perfect for this, but as Zen people, we're practically obsessed with posture, so I'm going to take this opportunity. So if you sit up, relatively straight, and just get comfortable wherever you are. And now I want you to let your eyes relax a little bit. Don't close them, but maybe don't leave them so open. And you don't have to watch me right away. Later you can look up again. I won't do anything interesting. And now while you're sitting there, I want you to try to be aware of all the sounds in the room. It sounds very simple. Try to really relax reach out, notice all the things that are going on. You can hear people moving. And you can hear people breathing. Maybe you can hear yourself. Or you can hear someone sing. Whatever that is. And as you sit there, just try to hear all of them simultaneously. Don't grab anyone. Take them all. And then as I speak, notice how your mind contracts around the voice. It's very difficult to maintain this awareness of all the other sounds when someone is talking directly to you. And for me, you can imagine it's even more difficult because when we speak, the only thing we hear is our own voice. It's completely seductive. But just kind of rest in this. And I'm going to keep talking. And as I do, I appreciate it if you listen to what I said, but as this is going, try not to let go of all these other sounds. Try to keep your ears really open. This is kind of a trick. It's very difficult for the human mind to listen to two sounds at once, or three, or four, or five. Visually, we can do that very easily, but our ears aren't trained for this. And so we have to let go of something. We have to relax a little bit. And now while you're listening, I also want you to start thinking about your body and notice how your body feels. Notice if you're comfortable. If your hands are touching or not touching. If your feet are touching the ground. If you're warm. If you're cold. And as you're noticing your body, just realize that this body is not you. Not exactly. Because you can step back and you can observe. You can watch yourself breathing. If you really pay attention, sometimes you can feel your heartbeat. There's so much that we don't notice. And then notice your thoughts. Notice how they jump around. Notice how even as I'm speaking, you're able to hold on to some other thing that you were thinking about before. Like a little soundtrack. You can keep it running in the background so that you don't lose it. How you can multitask. How you do it all the time. Notice how you can have ideas about what I'm saying and how you can have ideas about those ideas. And watch how you're thinking about these things. from there, it's very easy to go into thinking about our feelings. You can notice if you're agitated. You can notice if you're bored. You can notice if you're carrying some emotion and you don't know why. Sometimes something happens in the day and we don't even register the event, but then the rest of the day just doesn't seem right. Notice how you carry all sorts of feelings about the past with you. And you have disappointments about things. And you have hopes. And then again, realize that those feelings are not you. Not example. Because you're watching them. But from where are you watching them? Notice all these things that are happening inside of yourself, and then step back and notice that you're already noticing yourself doing that. And then step back again. And you're noticing again. And step back. And you have this body. And you have these thoughts, and you have these feelings. And then in this moment, you also are surrounded by all these sounds. You're in this room with lights. And all these experiences are happening, and you're able to watch yourself having them. So you step back again, and you step back again. And each time you step back, your perspective broadens a little bit. It gets a little bit wider. What we find is that we're resting in a sea of awareness all the time. This is not something we have to choose. This is an observer who's always observing. But we're not very interested in that observer most of the time. It's very impersonal. It's very big. We get caught up in something that's more personal. And so we get very excited about this feeling, and we get excited about this event, and we grab this because we like this. This is a good memory. This is a good goal. And we think about that all the time. We chew on that all the time. It's really interesting for us. And we have some things we don't want to think about very much. Things we don't like, things we don't respond to the way we'd like. And so we try to push them out. We expend a lot of energy doing this. But all of this is happening inside of an awareness that's much larger than that. An awareness that isn't grabbing this and pushing this away. An awareness that has a much deeper and much wider sense of identity. Buddhist teachings would say that this experience, this observer, this objective stance is identical for everyone. And so even that is not exactly who I am, so much as where I am. It's my location in space. It's this constant watching, this constant noticing. You're still hearing all these sounds. They're subtle, they're there. And whenever you relax, or whenever my voice stops, and a sound comes in you hadn't noticed before, ask yourself, what have I been missing? How much am I not seeing every day? How many moments did I not see at all? Or, maybe more to the point, how many moments am I really present for? How many times in the day do I really stand where I am and notice? That's really cool. So we say that there's this awareness that's happening all the time. It's not a sign of any kind of attainment. It's not that we dive into spiritual practice and 10 years later we have this awareness. But maybe through some kind of spiritual practice, whatever that is, we start to notice that it's there. Or we start to notice, even on a simpler level, we start to notice that we don't notice so much. That's a good start. That's one side of awareness. That's important. But then there's this other side. And this other side is a kind of awareness that we can choose. In Japanese, there's this wonderful word. There's no good way to translate it. It's nen. Very simple. And it's wonderful because of the way it's written. And I really should have written it, but I'll explain it. The Chinese character for this word, nen, is made up of two other Chinese characters, which are very, very simple, but they've been squashed together into one. And the one on top means now, the present. And the one on the bottom means mind. You know it's good. And some traditions will describe this, and not inaccurately, as simply being the present. It's reality. It's nothing more than that. But there's another idea behind this nen. It has to do with where your mind is now. As something that you choose. Where do you place your attention? This is very different from when the Buddha says Jim, and Jim turns around. Jim's not choosing to place his attention anywhere. Jim's just being pulled. I like to say, there is no culture in the history of humanity that has been pulled so intentionally in so many different ways. We face something that no one has ever faced before. When you read how many ads we see in a day, just driving on the street, how many things are calling for our attention. Not just so that we see it, but so that we're attracted to it. And we go into stores and there's music playing. And we drive for a while and we watch it turn on the radio. And so now I'm isolated in a box, but someone's talking to me. And if I don't like this person who's talking to me, someone else can talk to me. And someone else can talk to me. And if I don't like if I don't agree with the politics of this person who is talking to me, if I flip around, I can find someone who agrees with me and will affirm my own belief system for free. And so in this way, we aren't really asked to choose very much. Everyone's calling out. Everyone is saying Jin all the time. And it's very appealing. This idea of men is not that. Men is a decision. A decision to place your attention somewhere. Now, there are lots of ways you can do this, but there's there's beginner men and intermediate men and advanced men. Typically, we try and put this attention from a Zen perspective into what we're doing now. It's really easy for me to put my attention into, TV. That's not really what I'm doing. What I'm doing when I watch TV is I'm sitting down. This doesn't seem like much, but if I start to notice that I'm sitting down, if I pay attention to sitting down, if I pay attention to how I'm sitting down, it becomes very interesting. It's very different. TV will start to lose. This is so much of what we do in Zazen, in the meditation, in this tradition. And from the outside, it looks so boring. And I know that there are some people here who are family or friends of people who regularly come to go on Zazen. And I have no doubt that you have asked what happens there and walked away feeling a little dissatisfied. Okay, let me get this straight. First, you wake up at 6. And then you stare at a wall for roughly 35 minutes. And the person who's telling you this is saying, yeah, it's great. That can be very hard to swallow. But what you find, if you put your attention into sitting there, is that it's really a full activity. There's really a lot to do. Now, what you can do when you sit in Zazen is you can watch TV. You don't need a TV to watch TV, you all know that. Right? We used to joke in the monastery that everybody has 3 channels. Maybe 4. 4 if you get cable. There's the past channel, there's the present channel, there's the future channel, and then, to be honest, there's something kind of like Cinemax. It's just kind of a fantasy channel. And everybody has their own pornography. Pornography doesn't have to be what we think it is. For some people, pornography is a house, right? You just sit there and you just design that house. And then the next morning you get up at 6:30 and you do it again. And you do it again. You can feed yourself in this way for a long, long time. And the past channel, for most people, comes in really, really well. You get great, great reception. And the future channel has endless, wonderful programming. It's all exciting. Everything in the future channel is wonderful. You know it's true. The present channel gets terrible reception. The present channel requires, and this is essentially what's happening in Zazen, is this thing where you're holding the bunny ears kind of with one hand, and you put the other hand over here, right, and you get just the right distance. And then you can see the present channel. This is Zazen. It takes this kind of tweaking. It takes this work, and it takes this decision. And the way that you find the present channel is by doing what you're doing in the present. I used to think that to be in the present, I had to be thinking about what was happening in the present. So it wasn't my present, it was someone else's. So the way I would be in the present is I would sit and I'd face the wall, but I'd be thinking, okay, what's going on in the present right now? Okay, well, in New York, it's 3 hours ahead. It's 3 hours ahead in New York, so what's going on? So the people are already at work. And so I try and picture New York in the morning. And I would do this kind of scan of the earth. Right now when I say this, it seems like so much work. But this was my way of trying to plug in. And it took me so long to start to notice that the present was happening right there. And that the present was that in this moment, I'm sitting just like this. and I'm facing this wall, and I'm breathing. And it's a total activity. If I say sit still, and you're all in these kind of semi-comfy chairs, I say just sit still. For maybe 5 minutes, everyone can do this without much effort. You just stop moving. So, oh, what's going to happen next? We make it a little more difficult. We sit and try and have a straight back. We get very solid. And then we say sit still. And you'll find if you do this, you have to decide to sit still in every moment in order to sit still. Sitting still is not doing nothing. Sitting still is incredibly active. And sitting still requires a tremendous awareness of where you are. And if you ever come to Udalani, where we sit, you'll see I sit facing out, in case there's some sort of emergency. And everyone else is facing the wall. So I get to watch. I'm not supposed to watch, but I get to watch everything. And what you see is that when someone is really trying to do this, when someone is really paying attention, when someone has their awareness in the present, that they sit kind of like this. But that after a while, almost anyway, they'll start to think about something that's kind of interesting, happened yesterday. And they won't show it on their face, but their thumbs will start to do something like this. And then, kind of sit there. And if it's really a good, especially if it has a fantasy quality, because that's so, you can be so immersed, then this person who was sitting like this, I'll look up. And then they notice. Oh. And I can kind of smile when I see this because it's happening. But where that practice is really happening is in that moment of remembering. It's like, oh, I'm here. I was always here. And so you come back. And you come back. And you come back. It's so simple. And Zazen is kind of the playground for this. It's where we start to notice that even when I'm doing nothing at all, even when the only thing in front of me is a wall, I'm so distracted. My mind is so busy. I keep myself so entertained all the time. So it's nice sometimes to take away all the toys. But spiritual practice is not about sitting still. It never has been. It's dynamic. It's about how you move in the world. And so you learn through Zazen or through something about this coming back, and this coming back, and this coming back. And that way when you stand up and you move around and you go to your job and you go to your family, you find that there's something to come back to. And even as you're doing all these things, you're always coming back. But what is that? Now we go back to the story about men. I'm going to talk about beginner level men. Because if we try and place our attention on something that's too dynamic, on something that's too complicated, maybe we're not ready for that. I'm not ready for that. When we do Zazen, we say that the men is in the hands. Because the hands don't really move. Actually, your torso is moving because you're breathing all the time. And you feel this. And your spine, in little ways, even if you're just sitting like a rock, if you film someone doing Zazen, this is what it looks like when you speed it up. Because in all sorts of invisible ways, we're kind of always fixing ourselves. We're always finding that posture. You might not see it happening, but it's happening. And our heads move, and our eyes move. hands have no place to go. And so you can place your nen in your hands. It's the place that's still. And then when we stand up and we do what's called kinki, which is a kind of walking meditation, we do the same thing. We place our hands here and we say, well, the point of attention is your hands. This is the only part of your body that isn't moving. And why would you do that? Again, this practice is not just about stillness. But if we're honest with ourselves, we find that stillness is something we're not very good at. It's not really in our skill set. Movement is something we're very good at, whether it's physical or mental or emotional. We can move around, no problem. So Buddhist teachings say, well, don't really, you don't really have to get better at that. You can let that go for now. And that's why you find people sitting still. And that's why you find people trying to notice, what's the eye of the storm? What's the thing that's not moving when everything is moving? When you do that, when you start to notice that there's a part of you that isn't moving, and again, it's a trick. It's first, it's actually a physical part of yourself. If you can notice that this part of yourself is not moving, and don't lose sight of it, no matter what happens, just remember your hands. Then you can start to notice that there are other parts of you that are not moving. That there's a stillness that's always there. There's a stillness where we can always rest. And actually, in this way, we kind of find our way back to this first awareness that I was talking about. This awareness that's always present. This awareness that never goes away, even if we want it to. This is a simple trick, and it's simplistic. But one way to explore this then is the next time you're at work, the next time you're in a meeting, the next time you're talking to someone, put your hand somewhere, put it on your leg. But decide to do that. And decide that through this whole conversation, I'm not going to move my hand. I'm going to let this one thing be still. With this hand, I can go crazy. And I can say whatever I want. And I can get all caught up in all sorts of things. But if I get too caught up, of course, I'm going to forget about this. I don't want to forget about this. All I need is this one part of my mind that notices, oh, I've decided to be still. And if I do that, everything I say will be different. The way that I deal with this person will be different. The way that I listen to the meeting will be different. Because in every moment, I'm choosing to be here. I'm choosing to physically anchor myself to the present. It's a very simple thing to do. To achieve. But you can do this knowingly. No one will have any idea except you. If you can start to find your point of attention, if you can start to notice where you are placing your awareness in this moment, and this moment, and this moment, then you can go to that next step and you can say, where am I placing my awareness in my relationships? When I talk to this person, where am I looking? When I talk to this person, am I really here with this person? Or am I looking at them as someone from the past? Or am I looking at them as the person that I want them to be? When I look at them, am I looking at them as a potential? Or am I looking at them as who they are? Where is my awareness? When I work, where is my awareness? Is it in what I'm doing now? Or is it in the outcome? Am I really working right now in this moment, in this moment, in this moment? Or am I killing time? Am I getting a paycheck? We kill time so ruthlessly. And we imagine that, well, if today we just go by quickly, I can get to the good part. And then the next day we do it again, and the next day we do it again. And we look back and we find we were never there. We were never present. We were never aware of what was really happening. So we have this awareness that's always there. And then we have this awareness that we're choosing. However we choose it. And there's so many ways. We literally just put our mind somewhere. And then just let it sit. It's very difficult. And then there's a third kind of awareness that I said I would mention. And this is something I'm always afraid to talk about it because I think it sounds like intuition. And I don't think I'm qualified to talk about intuition. I don't think I'm a very intuitive person. But in Buddhism, we have this word, hoshi. And again, you can never translate it into these things, but it roughly means the awakening of the mind. And this is not such a big deal. We have these moments in our lives. We have these moments when we hear something, or we think something, or we see something, and it makes us want to engage in spiritual practice, whatever that practice is. Whether it's zazen, or prayer, or whatever, we feel these moments of pull, or push. We feel this part of our mind that wants to pay attention. We feel this part of our mind that wants to open up and include something that it doesn't usually include. We feel this part of our mind that says, I want to be more deliberate in the way that I speak. I want to be more deliberate in the way that I live. And we hear it, and I really believe this is universal. I really believe that everyone has these moments, but I also think we throw them away. We hear it, and maybe we feel really good. Maybe we even go home and we say, yeah, it's so good. Everything is good. And then we kind of jump into the normal conversation and we let it go. And then the next day we feel normal. And we say, oh, yesterday was a good day. This is another kind of awareness. There's a part of our mind that is encouraging us to go deeper. There's a part of our mind that says it's okay. It's okay to pay attention to this. It's okay to change this. It's okay to slow down. It's okay to notice that something is really beautiful. And just take it in. You don't have to speed by. It's okay to look across the table at the person that you've known for years and years and consider the possibility that maybe this is a person you've never known. And that that's exciting. We have that idea. I think we usually don't think it's exciting. I think it's terrifying. And we say, no, she's still that girl. she must be. And we put that person back in the box. And we put the relationship back in the box. And we ignore that voice. But I think we all feel this pull. I think we all feel these moments. And so there's this third kind of awareness, which is simply a receptivity. It's hearing that frequency and recognizing it for what it is. And just like a superhero who slowly starts to realize that there's more to them than they thought, we can hear this kind of voice. And we can get pulled into our lives. Sometimes very slowly, sometimes like we're diving. And so this third kind of awareness, I think, can be the thing that pulls us into the rest. It can be this voice, this awareness that makes us notice that there's something else to notice. It's so simple. But it takes a little effort. And it requires that we be a little bit more open. I want to do one more cheap little exercise with all of you. This is really simple. I like it. And I have a lot of it. Everybody's comfortable? This is the easiest game in the world. I'm going to clap. And I want you to try to clap at exactly the same time that I clap. I'm going to really try to lean in. If I were to play that game really, really well, you know I would never stop. Because in that moment, you are so tuned in. You are so aware of what's happening. Your awareness is absolutely clear. And then I clap, and you can see everybody's been sitting like this, and I clap, and it's and that's it. But that awareness, that attention to this moment is what we're actually asked to carry all the time. No one's ever going to clap. It will never come. You're always watching. You're always ready. You're still, but you're ready to not be still. watching, but you're not watching something that's moving. And you're listening because you know there's something coming. What if you felt like that all the time? What if you ate breakfast like that? I'll stop there. We brought a microphone, or we have a microphone, in case anyone wants to ask questions. And you don't have to ask questions about anything I said. By any means, you're welcome to. But we thought we should kind of open this option if people have things they'd like to ask about Buddhism, or about what we do here in town, or anything really. And if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you, because there's a good chance. But I think we do have some time. And probably if you ask something, it would be more interesting than what we see here.
I'm sorry that I was multitasking and looking at your brochure. I noticed it said 2006 perhaps you came?
Yes.
And I wondered if the Anchorage Zen Community existed before then, or like
Yes,
what was...
I'm glad you asked that question. The Anchorage Zen Community is a really well-kept secret in this town. It's about 30 years old. And like so many Buddhist communities, it started in people's living rooms, and and then this year it was in someone's garage, and then it was in someone's office, and then it was in someone's living room again. And things, you can go around the country and you find probably almost every small town, and this is not a small town by my standards, has these kinds of groups that no one knows about. You have to know somebody who knows somebody. It's like a bike club. When I was growing up in Helena, Montana, it was the same thing. I was really interested in Buddhism, but I just happened to talk to the right person at the right time, and he was someone who was involved in the group. And it was like I was really being part of some secret society. But the AZC was like that, but over time has grown and grown and grown. And for years they would invite teachers, wonderful teachers up from the lower 48. And there are other groups in town who follow that same model. It's wonderful because you get all this great exposure and beautiful retreats. And then after a while they rented space at the Inner Dance Yoga Studio. And so when I arrived in 2006, that was the model, so we would go there in the morning. And then from 2007 we moved into the building we're in now, which is kind of by Fireweed Cinemas. And I live in the back room with my wife and our new son. And who doesn't cry so much in the morning. And that permitted us to do a lot more. So now we can do things in the evening, we can do classes, we can have all-day events. We have a Dharma school for little kids and some of their own 3 to 7-year-olds. They're really fun. So this phase of the AZC is recent, but the AZC itself goes way, way back. You don't have to ask questions. Is there? Oh.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing your experience and what you do. In this practice of awareness of sitting, as you call Zazen, and when somebody is sitting there looking with their eyes open or closed at this blank screen, very mindfulness of the state, whether it comes from an ego's place or whether it comes from the spirit place. And what other practice can you count on? What other, in this habit, besides breathing?
So the first question is this activity of the mind, is this coming from a place of ego or a place of spirit? Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then the second question is what can we do besides sitting still and looking at the wall? Is that
Well, what can we do about reconciling or changing? How can we change from whether it's ego present or spirit? And then is there any other change possible besides relying on the habit of breath?
one of the things that's interesting about this practice for me, and that really drew me to it when I first came to Buddhism, was that there's a very deliberate stance about not necessarily making those distinctions about what is what and what is this and what is this. That body and mind, for example, are considered to be two sides of the same thing. They're inseparable, like two sides of a sheet of paper. And the heart and mind, there's no word that separates the two of them. They're singular. And so we can say, for example, that ego, or there's maybe ego isn't the best translation, but there's a function of the mind that is consumed with the distinction between who we are versus who we want to be. That's kind of the classical Buddhist definition of ego. That there's a part of your mind that loves that question more than anything, and makes sure that you don't notice much about the rest of your life because you're always thinking about this one thing. And it might take different faces, and it might take the question of, well, what should my life be, or whatever. It's the same thing. There's me, and there's a vision of what I think I should or could or might be. And that dissonance, that gap, guarantees that my vision is very, very narrow, and that I don't see these other things, and I don't hear these other things, and I don't notice these other things. That function is happening all the time, and certainly in Zazen we notice that. We notice that very clearly. Like I said, you can sit down and face a wall, there can be no sound, there can be no distractions, and then, bam, you're faced with total distraction of your mind, and you realize that, well, this has been kind of a running question in the background, but now that there's nothing to distract me, I can throw myself completely into the question of who I think I should be versus who I am. I can indulge entirely. That's a big discovery. So that's certainly a huge part of our experience, whether we're doing Zazen or not. But then, and we don't usually hear this word spirit, but we talk about enlightenment, actually, which seems like such a big thing. It seems kind of far off and big. But in this particular tradition, enlightenment is not really something you get. It's like this awareness that I was talking about in the beginning. It's something that you notice. It's something that you start to sense has been there all the time. And in the great scheme of things, we would say that this enlightenment is bigger than this ego battle that's going on. So big, in fact, that it contains it. And so we start to notice in Zazen that, yes, this is one aspect of my mind, but it's not the only one. There's more. I heard someone describe this once as giving yourself a wide pasture. You know, if you put a cow in a little tiny box, it really fills up that box. And we think that that cow is my mind. We think that that cow is who I am, because this is the thing I'm looking at all the time. This is the thing I'm thinking about. This is the thing that smells so bad. we put it in this really wide pasture, we find that, well, it's okay that it's always been there. It's okay that there's this part of my mind that is concerned with who I should be. We're not extinguishing thought. We're not killing the cow. We're not pushing it out. We're just putting it in its perspective as one aspect of mind. But there's a much wider notion of mind that includes that little tiny battle and much, 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 much more. And so through Zazen, or through whatever it is that we're doing, hopefully we make a kind of space so that we can start to see, and emotions are like this too. When you're angry, you think that everything is anger. You can be irritated with someone who's not angry when you're angry. Because what's wrong with you? But if you can open up this field of mind, you can start to see, well, yes, I'm angry, but anger is not all that I am. Anger is something I'm experiencing, while I also experience all these other aspects of myself. And so it just becomes one more cow doing its own thing. So you can be here. You just don't get to run the farm. As for how you do that, I think there are a lot of practices that are aimed at this kind of opening up. But from a Zen perspective, Zen always, whether it's attention to the breath, whether it's attention to a posture, whether it's attention to how you're using your hands, whether it's attention to how you're using your voice, it's never abstract. The practice is always grounded in something that is concrete, that is available right now. And so, if I'm sitting here, then from a Zen perspective, my Zen practice, my practice, terrible, is how I sit. And if I'm speaking to you, the total culmination of my life is this. Every thought I've ever had, everything I've ever done, everything I've ever heard, everything I've ever learned is either manifest right now or it's not. But this is the last moment of my life so far. Right now, this is the climax. And it is for all of you as well. And so how you're sitting in your chair is a total reflection of your life. Because what else is it reflecting? This is where you are. This is where you've arrived. For good or bad, you ended up here. And so sitting becomes sitting. And when you stand up and you walk out the door, you can walk out the door without a thought. You can walk out the door while you're talking to people about things, and then you get to your car and you think, how did I get to my car? Or you can walk out the door on purpose and be aware that with this step I'm here, with this step I'm here, with this step I'm here. And that that's always going to be the case. I hope that.
Thank you. That was a very good explanation, especially for I like that.
I think when we face calamity, disaster, near death, we become more aware. Everyone's had that experience. So faced with oblivion, we become more mindful, but only temporarily. And why is that?
Why is that?
Or how would you explain it in terms of your practice?
Habit. There are, when we talk about karma, for example, and karma always seems like such a complicated conversation. What we're usually talking about is our patterns, the way we always do things. way you stand, for example, when you stand at the bus stop, is an expression of karma, because you developed a way of standing. I was in a store once in Seattle, and a girl that I knew when I was in college, years after that, she saw me across this huge store, and she knew who I was right away, even though I had this crazy haircut and everything. And she came up to me and she said, "I knew it was you because you stand like that." And I thought, oh no. That's been years ago. This is like 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and nothing has changed. I've just established that this is what I do. I stand like this. And when faced with this thing, I respond like this. And when someone offers me French fries, I get really excited because I like French fries. Well, why do I like French fries? Well, because I've always liked French fries. There's nothing in my current existence that asks me to question whether I actually like them or whether I actually crave them right now. I've decided I like French fries. It's done. It's established. It's fixed. So you give me French fries any time of any day. And I'll say, oh, good. That's absurd. The way we generally understand karma, at least in this tradition, is that we notice these patterns and then we try to break them. We try to live deliberately. And this can be kind of willful sometimes. There's I always like this as an example. There's an episode of Seinfeld where George Costanza realizes that all of his instincts are wrong. And that everything he's ever done has taken him to the wrong place. And so he decides, well, I'm going to do the opposite of my instincts everywhere. And I think the first thing he does is he walks up to a beautiful woman and he says, "Hi, I'm unemployed and I live with my parents." And she looks at him and she says, "Hi." And then he goes to his boss and he starts telling his boss everything that he thinks because he's going to do the opposite. And everything he does in reverse. Well, one of my teachers is very fond of saying that this is what Zen practice is. You find the thing that you would do unconsciously, and then do the opposite. Doing Zazen is an obvious example of this, because there's absolutely nothing in our mindset that says we should face the wall and sit still. It's absolutely counterintuitive. But we can try these things, we can notice. And when we do that, we find that the way I've always done it is not the way that I have to do it. I can choose the way that I live my life. I can choose the way that I do this and this and this and this. And again, just like this nin, the way that we do this in this practice is very concrete. I'll tell people when they come to sit for the first time that they really should probably also go to the gym. One of the best things you can do is get in shape, because when you get in shape, you feel really different. Right? If you have the experience ever of going from being not so fit to being fit, you find that you walk really differently. You find that you approach the world really differently. And you feel it, and you notice, and you say, this is different. So you start making different choices. If you take a dance class, you find that you don't walk the same way anymore. It changes you. And if you realize, I don't have to walk this way, then you realize, I'm choosing how I walk. I'm choosing how I sit. I'm choosing how I stand. And if I'm choosing those things, maybe I can choose whatever I want. And in this way, we start to notice our patterns. But we start with the physical ones. And if we notice those, and we realize that those are usually representative of something else. Something that's maybe not so visible. And when we see those things, we find that they're not really fixed. They're just habits. And so when we have this calamity, when something happens, we can get jarred into a different way of seeing. It can be kind of exciting or scary, depending on, I suppose, the nature of the situation. And like you said, very often, a day later, a week later, a month later, a year later, we find that we're right back where we were. And I think it's because we expect the momentum of that change. We expect just the feeling of that to take us. Oh, I feel different today. I must be different. but I'm still standing where I'm standing. And I'm still sitting where I sit. There's no choice there. But when you have that moment, when you have that experience of calamity or joy or whatever, that makes you see the world a little bit differently, you have this opportunity, and you need to develop this kind of awareness around it. To say, well, if I feel like this, that must mean that I have the capacity to feel like this, right? By definition. And that means I could choose to feel like this tomorrow. And I can do it again, and I can do it again. And that becomes your pattern. And then eventually that becomes lazy. And maybe you need to break that pattern, you need to break that pattern. But it's always about living on purpose. About choosing what you do and choosing what you do. It's simple, but it's not easy. I'm also trusting the people here to be watching the time because I don't have
This doesn't really have to do with the present, but I was just wondering, you know how other religions have miracles, or maybe their parents pushing them towards a certain religion, like how you chose to become a full-on monk, you know, shave your head, dress like it, everything.
Okay. I always have to say I don't know. And that's not a joke. Because I stand where I stand now, and I look back 10 years ago or 20 years ago and I think, wow, I didn't see this coming at all. There was a period as a child when I wanted to be a Catholic priest, but that didn't work out. I grew up in a Catholic family, and I did all the things you're supposed to do, and I went to church, and actually, it was kind of wonderful. And even now I have a very good feeling about that. But somewhere along the way, I started reading all these kind of dangerous books. At first they were about, I was interested in reincarnation, which is funny to me now, because now I don't think it's interesting at all. But I was really interested as a young person, and so I was reading a lot about Hinduism. And at the time, the books that I could find in Helena, Montana about Hinduism were not really source texts. They were books that were written under the influence of psychedelic drugs. So I had a dog-eared copy of Be Here Now, for example, that I read over and over and over again. And my response was exactly the response that's intended, which was, whoa. Is it possible to really see through this kind of lens? You know, is it possible to see the world this differently? And then naturally, you know, because I was reading those things, and I started reading some things that were maybe a little bit truer to the actual tradition. And then along the way, someone actually gave me some Buddhist books, and they were so boring that I put them away. I read a little bit, and I said, you've got to be joking. And I put it down. And then I got really into Taoism, and thought it was just the most wonderful thing in the world. But frustrating, because there's all this talk about the sage. And the sage does these wonderful things. You know, the sage never gets hurt because he's always very, you know, he just rides the waves. And I thought, that's so cool. But there was no footnote about how to become the sage. And that bothered me. And after a while, someone lent me a book that was a Buddhist book, specifically a book about Zen Buddhism. And when I read it, my feeling was, and I remember I called up my friend, and I told him, I said, I think I found the manual for being that sage. I think that this is what that's about. And I started reading as much as I could about that, and then that drew me more into Buddhism as a larger thing, as a larger field of study. And then it just so happened, like I said, that I mentioned to a high school teacher, actually, that I was really getting excited about Buddhism, and he said, oh, we have a secret society. You know, and I went and I started doing Zazen, and then from there, a lot of things happened without my seeming to control them. I went to Japan, I ended up being ordained, and then I ended up in a monastery. monasteries, and then along the same route one day I woke up and I was in Anchorage, in a place where I had never, ever imagined I would be. And I was dressed like this, and I was talking to people. But like many people in the West, it was really through books. It was just this kind of intoxicating buffet of ideas that I had never been exposed to before. And I feel really fortunate for that. A lot of people have asked me, our son is 8 months old. He's, he doesn't have a whole lot going on right now, mentally. But people always ask me if we're going to raise him Buddhist or what that means, and he'll be raised, obviously, around a lot of Buddhists. So whether we teach it or not, he can't avoid it. But I was saying, one thing I feel almost a sense of loss about is that for me, discovering these ideas when I was at the age I was at, which was about 17 years old, was such a wonderful experience, because the timing was very good, and I was looking for something, and I found something, and I was able to make a choice to throw my whole life into this thing. And I almost feel bad for him, because I think he won't have that experience. He won't ever get to discover these teachings or this practice for himself from zero, because it will always be this boring thing. You know, it will always be just kind of what his house looks like. And to me, that's a loss, because I wouldn't have wanted to find this when I was really young. I think I wouldn't have wanted the opportunity to think that it was boring. I think I was very fortunate. I have to ask if we're okay for time. 5 minutes. Okay. So we could, I seem incapable of answering your question in 5 minutes, but I could if anyone else has a question. Oh, there's one over here.
Hi. Well, I want to ask a question about what other techniques can you tell us that can physically anchor us to the present moment? I know, for example, we could do meditation about putting ourselves in front of a wall and trying to keep awareness. I know you also said that, of course, there's examples of things that people do in India, like standing on one leg. Then we could also practice by putting our attention on a part of our body that we could keep still. And I know you mentioned a couple of other ones. I wanted to know, maybe you could tell us maybe something exotic, or well, not really exotic, but something moderate too, that our people we could do and stuff like that. Because I was really interested on that, I know there's walking and standing meditation, and just trying to keep your mind to that. But I want to know that something that could be more physical.
I'll try. I should say that if you just look at the way we decorated the stage, you probably can guess that we don't do very much that's exotic. But I think all of this practice comes down to doing something 100%, whatever it is, whether it's sitting or standing or walking or talking or listening. And so, for example, when I entered the monastery, there were all sorts of rules about how you do this and how you do that. But the one that stood out was that you do everything with 2 hands. Even if you don't need 2 hands, you do something with 2 hands. And so if you need to pick up an object, you pick up an object with 2 hands. I don't need them. But if I do it with 1 hand, I'm going to do something else over here, and I'm going to divide myself. Right? And so I make this decision that even the smallest thing, and it gets really funny when you eat because you use chopsticks. And when you pick up the chopsticks, you have to pick them up with 2 hands. And then you hold them in 1 hand, and with 2 hands you pick up the bowl. And then you have 1 hand for the bowl and the chopstick. And the whole time you're always doing things with both hands. But what this is asking you to do is it's asking you to do everything wholeheartedly. Even the smallest thing. So that when you pick up a cup, it's not just a means to get somewhere. It's a total activity. And when you listen to someone, you don't listen to them while you're thinking about where you're going. You don't listen to them while your, students come to my office, and it's so hard because I have computers, is at University of Alaska. And when students come in, I always have to turn it off. Because if I don't, I'll talk to them, but I'll read stuff too. And they'll come to me with some huge problem, and I'll say, oh, that's terrible. Ooh, I got me. You have to make a choice not to do that. And so when someone enters the room, you hit sleep. I'm going to listen to just this person. And when I read a book, I'm not going to read a book and listen to music and watch TV at the same time. Really, one thing is enough. And when I clean the house, I'm just going to clean the house. When I take a walk, maybe I don't have to listen to music and take a walk. Maybe taking a walk is a full activity. Maybe eating, and people are so bad about this, maybe eating is actually something you could do without anything else to look at, except food. Nothing in our society encourages us to do this. But when you do it, I think you always find that it's fascinating. And it always tastes better. And later, a week later, you can talk about that meal. You say, remember that thing we made that was so good? But how many meals have I had that I don't remember? Because it was simply it was an IV while I was watching a video. It could have been anything. You could have put anything in that bowl. I think all of this practice just comes down to that. So that when you're doing Zazen 100%, and you're not doing something else. When you're walking 100%, and you're not doing something else. And when you're living 100%. And finding that that's possible, and that it's simpler than you might think. And I'll stop there, because maybe that's underlying. I want to thank you all very much. It's really an honor for me anytime I get to talk to people and talk with people about this thing that for me is so exciting. And I want to make an open invitation. We're not doing this lecture series to, recruit you. We're not concerned about the number of Buddhists in Anchorage. We're fine. But I would also be missing this opportunity if I didn't say that you're very welcome to join us in anything that we do in our own little practice, in our little house. You can go to our website and get all this information, so I won't go into all of it. You can find it very easy. But you would be very welcome anytime, and it would be wonderful to see you there and get to talk to you individually. And then I'll also do a little plug, which is that a month from now, on November 18th, we're going to do this again, and I'm going to try to say something articulate about compassion, which is a huge concept in Buddhism, and I think something I'll need the month to think about. So thank you very, very much.